After all we've been through, everything that I've done, it can't be for nothing.
Hard and endless years go by, and even the lesser-rated world of The Last of Us starts to seem tolerable. Perhaps Joel and Ellie have found, with a lot of effort, a new balance within the walls of Jackson, but the ending of the first chapter laid a heavy burden. Starting from the foundation of the previous conclusion, The Last of Us Part 2 builds a monumental and impeccable story, an enveloping plot that dismantles and perturbs all of the players' beliefs for 30 hours, bringing them to reevaluate all of the characters and even reflect upon themselves, questioning their own moral principles. This will be enough to make of The Last of Us Part 2 a precious experience, but the reality is that the game is much more. It is the most complete and structured game of the industry, even if compared to other milestones. A colossal that points its outstanding and refined gameplay, interweaving it with an unforgettable story, made of little infinitesimal details which Stico knew never to let go. The Last of Us Part 2 tells a story of vengeance without giving any explicit moral judgment. At the center of the events, no character is driven by a positive value. Although aggressive and selfish, Joel decided to travel across America for a noble cause in the first chapter, whereas the urge that now moves Ellie is primitive and visceral. The event that upsets the life of the protagonist forever fills with rage even the player, but that doesn't mean it will convince them to accept and share the girl's anger. Ellie is an independent character with her reasons and her weaknesses, imperfect enough to estrange the player. A potent and firm change is felt not only in the management of the protagonists, but also in the timing and style of the narration. The first chapter was slim and essential, ran by emblem moments of one-year trip. The Last of Us Part 2 takes on a completely different road, which at the beginning might even upset you, because it decides to tell every moment, yield to every scene a different point of view, making every instant whole and meaningful. The ability of the team to create an articulate and powerful plot hasn't vanished, of course, and it ends into a simply flawless conclusion. The global vision creates itself gradually, giving you the time to think about the characters, their motivations, and the consequences of their actions. The Last of Us Part 2 penetrates you. It torments and breaks you without any warning, fully aware of the fact that you've grown as a player and as a human being. On a gameplay standpoint, this sequel stands off as a product more playful and balanced than its predecessor. The experience of Part 2 reduces the gap between cutscene and game sequence, allowing the player to slide in and out of the cinematics without realizing it. The transition between interactive and filming phases are not pressing though, because the portions of gameplay are many, large, and boundless. The variety of situations, the width, and the diversity of the areas have no comparison among this generation. The ratio between density and extension in The Last of Us Part 2 is simply miraculous. A marvel that keeps breathless after dozens of hours. The gameplay of the production is based on the groundwork of its predecessor. Naughty Dog explores the survival action genre, blending stealth phases with looting and optimization of materials and severe, tense gunfights. Every element of the gameplay has been expanded and strengthened, but when they meet the sublime level design in EA, they find their true strength. It is true though that this perfection is found only after a couple of hours, when the team decides to break the tie after a long sequence that seems to have been used as an introduction. During the first part of the journey, Naughty Dog seems to want to do a summary, even going back to certain themes and situations seen in the first chapter and in the DLC Left Behind. Disposed of all the preliminary formalities, The Last of Us Part 2 starts to get serious. In the meanwhile, the player will have unlocked the abilities necessary to create new objects, and the overall gameplay would have made itself clearer and stratified. The Last of Us Part 2 has been created first and foremost to interact perfectly and immaculately with all its systems. Action and exploration interweave each other constantly, as well as gunfights and stealth. In the role of Ellie, we will carry on a meticulous and ruthless action of war, made by silent assaults, sudden gunshots, and abrupt escapes. The level design has been created in a way that every area could become an amusement park to a lethal and determined survivor. The brand new verticality allows us to catch the opponents out of guard, but also imposes a much higher level of attention, because enemies could be in positioning advantage too. And then there are silencers and arrows, new explosive traps, which could give new extremely diversified engagement possibilities. We have to say that the game is at its best when the difficulty is set on higher levels, when the lack of materials forces us to make more thoughtful choices in order to optimize the resources, allowing the survival aspect of the game to rise and shine. The other incredible aspect of the game consists in the behavior of the opponents. Alert and wary, the Washington Liberation Front and the Scars soldiers patrol the areas of the game with caution. They try to cover each other's backs and they avoid converging on the same position. They investigate suspect sounds and, more importantly, they communicate to each other with a system of transmission finally more believable and coherent. Knowing that every opponent has a name, that they have a relationship with each and every one of them, and to see their reactions filled with anger of who has lost someone close in battle, or to hear a dog yapping close to his dead owner, all these things convey the essential weight of every kill. If The Last of Us Part 2 succeeds in maintaining a very high level of standard for all its 30 hours, the merit goes not only to a tidy and intense gameplay, but also to the immense ambition of Naughty Dog, which created an amount of content that is astonishing. During all of the adventure, we never see an area similar to the previous one, in a catalog of situations and scenery that seems to be endless. Sometimes the areas slightly open themselves, allowing the player to explore abandoned buildings optionally, which store collectible cards, documents, and hidden stories. Obviously, the Washington Liberation Front soldiers and the religious fanatics known as the Scars are not the only foes in the game. In this sequel, the infected are utilized during the darkest and more destabilizing moments in the game, protagonists of thrilling sequences just like the best horrors. On this point of view, The Last of Us Part 2 exceeds every expectation, filled as it is of memorable scenes. The furious chasing of Uncharted peep out, followed by purely horror sequences, perfect in their ability to join the new imagery. The idea is to continuously amaze the player, meanwhile maintaining a great coherence within the game universe. The Last of Us Part 2 is a title so full that in various moments during the game, you will feel extremely satiated and fulfilled, ready to go on. And exactly in those moments, the game will push forward, driving you a little bit further, across an endless journey. Passing on the visual aspect of the game, the first thing that catches the eye is the work done on the animations. Ellie moves around fully aware of her surroundings and uses the environment to her advantage when she needs to take out enemies. The Last of Us Part 2 makes us perceive the heaviness of the limbs, the inertia of the hits, the pain of the wounds, like never before in a video game, with a rawness and a physicality that leaves us just speechless. It is not secondary the importance played by the rendering. An extraordinary test for the console that seeks to go over its limits both when it comes to the quantity of the objects and for its definition and quality of the textures. Sensational the job done on the illumination, an element with which the team constantly plays in order to create oppressive and anxiety-inducing atmospheres. On a PlayStation 4 Pro, the resolution is set on 1440p stable at 30 FPS, and on 4K panels some visual artifacts are visible related to the upscaling process. Last but not least, incredible the job done on the sound of the game. What astonished us is the management of the ambient sounds. On one hand, it simulates perfectly the spatiality and the direction of the noises. On the other, it can count on hundreds of samples, essential to build an enveloping environment, a perfect frame for the exceptional gameplay of the production. The Last of Us Part 2 is the best product from Naughty Dog. A powerful tale filled with pain, able to leave the player overwhelmed and hurt. No other game can transform a story in a moment of maturation and growth without impose any ethic judgment. The Last of Us Part 2 is also a marvel to play. A product that ensembles a gameplay intense and stratified, differentiated from any other and able to adapt to an impressive variety of situations. Naughty Dog demolishes any previous achievement or level design, building a believable and coherent world. The Last of Us Part 2 is a monument to the gaming industry, and at the same time is a productive miracle that reaches the same fate of its predecessor. That is to close a generation, bringing it to perform its peak, immortalizing it in a precious memory.
They used to